A tanker crew is bleeding out in the Strait of Hormuz right now. One sailor is already dead. 8 more are wounded. And the man who could stop this, the President of the United States, just changed his mind for the second time in 24 hours. That's not a headline. That's a pattern. And by the end of this broadcast, you're going to see exactly how dangerous that pattern has become. I'm Professor Anderson. This is Global Brief. And tonight, we're not doing 5 stories. We're doing one because everything else happening in the world right now is downstream of what's happening in this narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. Here's why you should care, even if you've never once thought about a shipping lane on the other side of the planet. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Choke it, and you don't just hurt Iran. You hurt the price at your gas pump, the cost of everything shipped in container, and the stability of every market watching this unfold. This strait isn't a regional flashpoint. It's a global pressure valve. And right now, someone is leaning on it hard. So let's get into what actually happened in the last day, because it moves fast. President Trump has just abandoned his own threat to slap a 20% surcharge on every ship passing through Hormuz, a threat he made less than 24 hours earlier. That reversal lands after another savage exchange of strikes. The U.S. is trying to break Iran's grip on the strait. Iran, unable to strike America directly the way it wants to, is instead hitting America's neighbors, Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, countries that didn't start this war and can't stop it either. Oil prices are already clawing back losses on the news. Ship traffic through the strait has crashed to its lowest point in 2 months. Nobody wants to sail into that water. Would you? Now the details, because they're brutal. Explosions are being reported across multiple Iranian cities near the strait. Strikes have hit near Bandar Abbas and Bushehr. Bushehr, home to Iran's only civilian nuclear power plant. Let that sit for a second. This follows a night where the U.S. confirmed it struck military sites across Iran in a 5-hour bombing run. Iran claims it disabled 2 massive oil tankers in the strait during that window. 1 crew member dead. 8 wounded. Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain are all reporting Iranian strikes on American assets on their soil, with each government claiming it intercepted incoming drones and missiles before they hit. This is happening one day after Trump vowed to hit Iran very hard and reinstated a full naval blockade of Iranian ports. A blockade meant to choke off any vessel trying to move through Iranian waters and the Gulf of Oman. And then came the twist. On Monday, Trump announced he'd personally impose a 20% toll on every cargo shipment crossing the strait. 24 hours later, he reversed himself entirely, posting on Truth Social that highly productive conversations with Middle East leadership convinced him to scrap the fee, replacing it with vague promises of Gulf investment into the U.S. instead. Watch that pattern. It's about to repeat. While all this was happening, Trump was hosting Iraq's prime minister at the White House, and Iran ate up nearly the entire meeting. His justification for wanting that toll in the first place: he doesn't like calling it a fee, but he thinks it's unfair that America protects this strait for the whole world, including China, without getting paid for it. Let's go to Washington, because our correspondent has been tracking this reversal in real time. The blunt summary: we are back exactly where we started a day ago. The blockade on Iranian ports is still going ahead. It takes effect within hours, but the 20% cargo charge is dead, gone in a single news cycle. Our correspondent says Trump appears to have been talked down by concerns in Washington and, in his own words, by conversations with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states who did not want that tariff imposed. In exchange, he says those countries will invest directly in the U.S. instead. Nothing signed, nothing concrete. Just a promise, and a complete reversal of a threat he made barely a day earlier. There's a nickname for this now, and traders use it constantly. Trump always chickens out. It's become market shorthand for exactly this move. Big threat, global headlines, a spike, then a quiet retreat once the cameras move on, which raises a real question. If markets have already learned to price in the walk back, does the original threat even carry weight anymore? Or has escalation itself become the performance? With de-escalation baked in as a punchline? Whatever you call it. Every foreign ministry and every shipping company on Earth is now watching for the pattern to repeat. But don't confuse this reversal with peace. Iran's military has issued a direct warning. reinstate the blockade, and they respond. Trump is accusing Tehran of violating their preliminary agreement because, in his words, there was something in the deal they didn't like. He's pointing to Clause 5 of the memorandum both countries signed, which commits Iran to using its best efforts to guarantee safe, toll-free passage for commercial vessels over a 60-day window between the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman. Iran reads that clause completely differently, insisting every vessel needs prior Iranian approval and must follow a designated route along the Iranian coastline, just one of 3 paths through this strait. I sat down with one of our regional analysts to pull this apart, because the disagreement here is almost a masterclass in how vague diplomacy detonates later. The memorandum was supposed to trigger ongoing talks between Iran and Oman to set the long-term rules for maritime traffic through Hormuz. That process collapsed. During the negotiation window, the U.S. quietly opened an alternative shipping route hugging Oman's coastline, a bypass that strips away Iran's leverage entirely. Iran calls that a flagrant violation of the deal, and our analyst is blunt. This agreement was ambiguous from day one, not just on Hormuz, but across multiple issues. It was only a matter of time before it blew up. So what's the psychology in Tehran right now? According to our analyst, Iranian strategists are actively wargaming worst-case outcomes. Many believe 4 straight days of relentless American strikes on Iran's southern military assets could be a prelude to something far bigger, a ground invasion or the seizure of an Iranian island. Tehran is bracing for the worst while betting that scaring off shipping companies and insurers is enough to deny the West true control of the strait. And here's the twist. That's exactly what Trump is trying to prevent too, denying Iran control right back. Strip away the diplomatic language, and what's left is simple. This is a war over who owns the Strait of Hormuz. Nothing more complicated than that. And Iran, having tasted this leverage, is never voluntarily giving it back. Our analyst went further. Western intelligence increasingly believes control of Hormuz now matters more to Iran's long-term strategy than its nuclear program ever did. For years, the nuclear file drove every negotiation, every sanctions regime, every headline out of Tehran. Now it's this stretch of water. And here's the brutal math behind that shift. No matter how many strikes America launches, it only takes one drone hitting one tanker for global insurers to pull coverage entirely. When that happens, the whole flow of oil and goods through that corridor stops. That's exactly what's happening right now. Barely any ships have moved through the strait in days. Translate that into your world. That's gas prices at your local station, shipping delays on things you ordered online, insurance premiums rippling through economies that have nothing to do with this war. Iran isn't giving this up, which means, our analyst argues, America needs something beyond brute force to actually solve this. Now widen the lens, because this war has stopped being contained. Bahrain, Jordan, and the UAE are all being hit as Iran retaliates against the latest American strikes. The UAE has condemned Iran outright for what it calls a brazen attack on tankers in Omani waters. India has sharply criticized Iran after strikes killed 2 seafarers, including 1 Indian national, and wounded 8 more, 6 of them Indian, 2 Ukrainian. Our correspondent covering the fallout from New Delhi lays out the human cost. 12 Indians were aboard 1 targeted vessel, 1 killed, 1 injured. 18 more were on a second ship, 9 wounded, 2 critically. India has summoned Iran's senior diplomat in Delhi to lodge a formal protest, condemning attacks that disrupted, in the government's words, free and safe navigation through international waterways. This is not the first time. Back in June, 3 more Indian sailors died when the U.S. military struck a tanker accused of violating the Iranian port blockade. And that time, India summoned a senior American diplomat instead. Sit with that for a second. These are merchant sailors, ordinary crew hauling cargo to keep global trade moving. Not soldiers, not combatants, not parties to this war. And they're the ones paying for it with their lives, thousands of miles from either capital making the decisions. India has tried to walk a tightrope through this entire conflict, refusing to loudly condemn either side and calling instead for dialogue and de-escalation, even as its own citizens keep coming home in caskets. That caution is getting harder to sustain the longer this drags on. Don't be surprised if it shifts. Iran insists it's only targeting American interests, but a military spokesman issued a chilling line. Any Gulf nation caught cooperating with Washington will be treated as a participant in this war. So how dangerous is this for regional stability? I asked one of our Middle East analysts directly. His answer was sobering. Gulf nations have been paying a devastating price since this war erupted in late February. Lives lost, infrastructure destroyed, billions in damage, including a direct hit on a major gas field in Qatar. And now, after decades of leaning on Washington for protection, a trust that dates back to the failure of Arab collective defense after Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait in the 1990s, Gulf leaders are quietly starting to question whether the U.S. can actually protect them at all. Air defenses are intercepting missiles and drones, sure, but the damage keeps piling up regardless. And now, there's a second layer of anxiety. Washington wants Gulf investment dollars in exchange for waiving that 20% toll, even as instability in the Strait threatens the very oil and gas revenue those countries would use to make that investment. The only real fix, our analyst argues, is ending the war outright. But Hormuz has become Iran's ultimate bargaining chip, not just for now but for the long run. And Tehran knows no amount of American firepower fully neutralizes the threat it can pose to shipping. Strike as hard as you want. It still only takes one attack to keep insurers running scared and tankers docked, which means Washington will eventually have to offer Gulf nations real guarantees, because military pressure alone clearly isn't working. And here's the bind Gulf leaders are stuck in. They can't fully walk away from Washington after decades of security cooperation and weapons deals. But they also can't ignore that their own cities and civilians are absorbing the cost of a war between two other powers. There's no clean exit from that position, just quiet frustration behind a public alliance. Now, the money, because behind every missile headline, there's a trading floor reacting in real time. Oil prices have started climbing back in the last few minutes since Trump's toll reversal. Prices spiked earlier today. The latest shipping data confirms traffic to the Strait has cratered to a 2-month low. Our business correspondent breaks down the trader mindset, and even he admits it's chaos. Trump's now scrapped 20% tariff plan pushed oil to roughly $87 a barrel in early trading. That eased once he softened his tone. But there's a deeper fatigue setting in. Traders have heard this combustible rhetoric from both sides for months, and increasingly the consensus is that a negotiated deal is still the most likely eventual outcome. That's why today's reaction, nervous as it was, wasn't nearly as violent as before. European indexes dipped roughly 1%, nowhere near the 5 to 10% swings we saw when full-scale war first broke out, or the equally sharp rebounds whenever peace looked possible. The market has grown a thicker skin. Traders have built the chaos into their expectations, which is its own kind of alarming. It means instability here has stopped being an emergency and started becoming the baseline. For now, everyone's holding their breath for a fast resolution, while quietly bracing for the next spike the moment news strikes hit the wires. Let's zoom all the way out, because this is the piece that ties everything together. That memorandum of understanding we've been discussing, it's looking less like an agreement and more like a monument to miscommunication. Here's what our chief analyst wants you to remember. This entire dispute over Hormuz didn't exist before this war. The Strait was open. Traffic moved normally. All of that changed the moment Israel and the United States launched this conflict on February 28th. What we're watching now is Iran making a permanent decision. It will never return to how things were. How much control Iran ultimately keeps is still an open question, especially with Oman insisting on its own role in the Strait's future, while quietly allowing certain American vessels to use its southern coastline, vessels that have since come under direct Iranian attack. Iran and Oman, allies for generations, are now struggling to even agree on a path forward. And that's the whole problem. Distilled, this memorandum, 14 paragraphs, drafted in haste, is vague enough that every side reads into it exactly what it wants to see. Iran points to Clause 5 and insists it grants management authority over the Strait. The United States reads the exact same clause as requiring Iran to fully and unconditionally open the waterway. Two governments, two lawyers, two completely different documents, reading the identical words. Our chief analyst spoke with Arab oil executives in the region, who summed it up perfectly. You could drive a truck to the loopholes in this drafting. That ambiguity is exactly what's now threatening to collapse the whole arrangement. It's a lesson diplomats keep learning too late. A deal signed fast under pressure, with language built to paper over positions that were never actually reconciled, isn't peace. It's a pause button, and pause buttons get pressed again. So, where does this go from here? Our analyst calls it a no war, no peace scenario, not full-blown conflict, but nowhere close to lasting peace either. Arab mediators are growing visibly exhausted by this cycle. In just the last 24 hours, the region tipped noticeably closer to outright war, with Trump again pressing Congress for authorization to escalate. The core problem is simple. Neither side wants total war, but neither will back down. Each convinced the other cracks first. Both sides are under real pressure. Trump is staring down midterm elections with the clock ticking louder every week. Oil prices climbing again, markets on edge. But Iran's pressures may run even deeper. 80% inflation, millions of jobs lost, 2 wars in under a year, and one of the largest digital communications shutdowns in modern history. And despite all that internal strain, Iran has made one thing unmistakably clear. Control of the strait is a bright, uncrossable red line. They are not backing down. So ask yourself this before you close this tab. How many more cycles of strike, retreat, and re-escalation can this region actually absorb before something breaks for good? Either a ceasefire that finally holds, or a war that stops having an off-ramp at all. Nobody tonight has a confident answer. Not the analysts. Not the traders. Not the diplomats shuttling between capitals right now trying to hold this together. I'm Professor Anderson. This has been Global Brief. This story is moving hour by hour, and we'll be tracking every part of it.